Friday, the 21st of July. Sorry, took me a second. I kind of blanked. It has been summer for a month. We are losing a little bit of daylight every morning, a little bit at night. It seems to happen more um, in the early morning than it does. It takes longer for sunrise to get here uh, than it did a month ago. That is where the biggest reduction of light is coming from. A little bit again in the evening, but not much. I think the latest the sun set was like 8:37, and right now it's setting at 8:34 or 8:35. But sunrise was happening at about 5:40-ish or somewhere around there, and it's happening now. I think this morning was 5:54. So you can see how that works, that we lose that daylight in the morning, which actually isn't too bad for me as I enjoy those sunrise walks. I mentioned that quite a bit. The health benefits of getting out there and getting that direct sunlight hitting the eyes first thing in the morning, um, as soon as possible. Get out, take a walk, um, let that sunlight hit the eyes, and let the chemical reaction take place that prepares you for a better night's sleep right at that instant. Moments of waking up. You get that sunlight in your eyes, you're already doing the things that are going to actually help you sleep later that night. If you get up and you meditate, you get in some sun salutation, particularly inversions, which deeply, deeply relaxes the central nervous system. And then you get that direct sunlight on your eyes. You have a healthy breakfast a little bit later. You are doing those things that support the habits. You're doing the habits that support um, a good night's sleep, which is a priority for me. Um, Forget which therapy practitioner we were talking about recovery, or he was talking about recovery, and he said his recovery is when he sleeps. He trains pretty much every day. It might have been Lee Hazard. Um, Lee Hazard drops so many great tips and insights that it's hard to keep track of. Um, and I agree. Sleep is my recovery. Uh, I train every day. So I try to make sleep a priority. I'm not always successful because I do have some sleep issues on occasion. Um, I have to do things just right, or it's going to have an effect on me. Little things that you learn. If you get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and if you are over 50 and you're a man, you're going to get up and go to the bathroom. Uh, I stay well hydrated, so even if I was under 50, I'd have to get up and go to the bathroom probably. However, one of the tips that I recently saw on the YouTube Sleep Doctor, um, don't turn on the bathroom light. I carry a little tiny flashlight with me. I have it next to my bed, actually, for a couple different reasons, but um, one of which, when you go to the bathroom, you want some dim light so you can see what you're doing. You don't want that light hitting your eyes and causing a waking cycle to start to occur at that moment. You want to put that off. And then you want to get your heart rate back under um, 60, which is important. Now, some people have a naturally, well, I guess I have a phone call of no importance. The vast majority of phone calls to me are of no importance. Um, that some people have high heart rate. My father's heart rate was higher, so he wasn't going to get it down to 60. But you want to get it lower as possible. For me, my heart rate first thing in the morning is generally in the low to mid 40s, um, generally towards the mid 40s. I know when I'm overtraining when I wake up and it's in the low 50s. That's when it's called, I have to do an easier day. So, um, little things support the big things. And it's all big things when we think about it. Um, Diet, all of our nutritional choices lead towards how we're going to age. What I did when I was 20 is having an effect on me now, and the things I did when I was 20 wasn't all that great. So what I do, I can't minimize them now. It's too late. I can't go back in time, but I can maximize the things that I'm doing now, which actually very much help counter. Your body has a remarkable ability to heal, um, not just to heal, but to actually reset itself. Sort of amazing when you think about it, what we can do. Um, so we take those little things and we really need to re-educate ourselves on what we consider healthy practices. Everyone, in my opinion, should do some type of breath work. They should do some type of meditation. They should do some type of yoga mobility work, qigong, yoga. We can call it mobility work, stretching, but really it's working with the subtle energy of the body. As I teach you in Vedic yoga schools, I learned it in my meditation certification class. We're talking layers, that the body doesn't end where we think it does. It's a continuation through the environment, through trees. The trees are actually another greater set of lungs. It continues on and on and on, and yet it also goes infinitely within as well. So when we work with yoga, when we work with qigong, we're working with that subtle energy, not just of the body, but the subtle energy of the universe, which is our larger body. These are the things, same with meditation. These are the things that we sort of ignore or we don't know. We're not taught it in school. People aren't taught it in medical school. This may have changed, but a few years ago, it was routine for you could become a doctor and not take a single course on nutrition. And yet, we go all the way back to ancient Greek and the very beginning of any sort of modern medicine. And the first rule of medicine is let food, hello Milka, let food be thy medicine. How far we have strayed. Pretty amazing to think of, remarkable to think of, that was a basic tenet of medicine, and that we still take. I keep saying we, as if I'm a doctor. Doctors still take the Hippocratic Oath, and yet they ignore the very first tenet of medicine and where it came from. I think now doctors are probably more aware of the role of nutrition, and yet it's still slightly misguided. The food pyramid is basically upside down for the most part. And we allow ourselves to be poisoned. You know, we demand those foods that are going to kill us. And we don't need them, and we don't even want them, which is why they have advertisers convince us that we want them. I don't know, guys. Don't know what to do about it. I'm thinking about reading from my blog. I haven't, probably all week. I set out to do it, and then I go off on a tangent. Yesterday, it was starting with Rumi. I don't know where that came from. I think I was talking politics, which is a topic I avoid talking about too much here in this conversation, because it becomes about opinions, and that's where Rumi came up. I started talking about selling our cleverness, which, as he goes on to describe, is opinion. So selling our opinion, selling our cleverness for bewilderment, and bewilderment is intuition. And boy, did I beat that topic to death. I kept coming back to it over and over and over again, because who wouldn't want to live their life in bewilderment? We do, but we quickly cover it up because we're ashamed, we're afraid. Sometime in our life, as I mentioned the story with Anthony DeMello, there was a time as a child when we were viewing the sky and saw these magically winged feather creatures darting about, and we were bewildered. Our intuition called that this was an aspect of us that was given flight. And we were amazed, bewildered. And someone, a teacher, a parent, a sibling, a stranger came along and said, "Oh, it's a bird." And that day, to a large extent, magic ended because we saw birds. We didn't see those magical creatures. I am a firm believer in magic, a firm believer in bewilderment, and I do my best to let go of the opinions that tell me otherwise and live a life of being bewildered. I think maybe Mocha could probably say um, easily that I am bewildered. um, Maybe not meaning it the same way I do, but also Mocha is someone else who believes in magic. She doesn't just see birds; she sees the flight of magical winged creatures. So it is a pleasure to take those later morning walks and runs that we do together, along with Misty, who lives in complete bewilderment, as all dogs do. But I think Misty even has a keener edge to that bewilderment as she continuously walks with a big smile upon her face. Um, Misty is a dog, by the way. I've mentioned it before, so I'm sure anyone tuning in is probably well aware of that. But I just wanted to make sure. Um, so back on Rumi, back on bewilderment, back on magic. One of my favorite topics to talk about. And getting in that first morning walk. And lately it has been right before the sun comes up. Um, what's more magical than darkness parting itself for light? That light is ever present, and yet all of a sudden it is even more so that um, we have what appears to be the absence of light, and then streaks appearing in the sky, hints of what's to come, and then we have that subtle growth of light making itself more and more evident. Um, a Facebook friend of mine, Chris Nybert, who wrote the book No Self, No Problem, wrote the other day that light is actually consciousness. Consciousness in display. Everything is made of light. Everything is made of photons, um, which is just one of the most fundamental, unsplittable particles. Doesn't get any smaller. I'm not meditating. People hear me say, that's one of the great things about being a meditation teacher, is that I can actually get away with pausing and saying, and people think, he's in deep, deep state of meditation. Something profound is going to come out. The only problem with that is the next thing I have to say better be profound, or I've shattered the illusion forever. And it's back to me just using as a filler, as a space between whatever slightly inane thing that I said and the next probably slightly inane thing that I'm going to say. The thing is, it's a free rambling conversation, and I don't rightly know what I'm going to say next, which is why there's a lot of pauses, some continuous pauses, because I'm not thinking of, it's a horrible thing to say, isn't it? I'm not thinking of the next thing to say. I am waiting for the next thing to appear, and then generally I say it. Oddly, I said what a horrible thing it is to say I'm not thinking, and yet truly, we're not thinking. We are thought filled. We are given thoughts. Thoughts arrive, and we process them and we claim them as our own, but no one has ever think the thought, because there is no actual thinker in the brain. There's no compartment in the brain that you could pinpoint and say, that's the thinker. That's who you are. And yet we have these conversations going on in our head, and we claim them as our own. This is our voice, our thoughts. And worse off, we believe them. We don't have to. Or we can just let a little bit of doubt. I mention all the time, um, most especially in Korean Zen, there you are asked to cultivate the don't know mind, which is another way of saying bewilderment. Um, and note that Rumi says, sell your cleverness for bewilderment. Give up those opinions, which is another way of saying, don't believe everything you think. A lot of people want to argue that because they want to hold on to those. There is turtles all the way down, and yet they are not doing the thinking. They don't need to. Turtles are beyond thought. They are beingness themselves. I should, if anyone watches this later and they don't see the chat, what Mocha had said is there's a turtle sitting in there doing the thinking question. And that is referring to actually one of our favorite, one of my favorite, one of her favorite, one of Barefoot Burpee's favorites, the universe being turtles all the way down. And that is as believable as anything else. Can't convince me otherwise. Just because, we don't see the turtle, it's too big to be seen in one sight. You have to get perspective. You have to be farther back. You have to be the universe itself to see the turtle. And we are the universe itself in false belief that we are this limited, thinking, opinionated, clever person. Again, as Chris Nybert writes, no self, no problem. As my friend, and today's his 95th birthday, Bob Admonson says, he was an actual student of Nisargadatta Maharishi. What's wrong with right now if you don't think about it? Let that sort of turn around in the brain a little bit. Everything has to be thought about for something to be wrong. That doesn't mean there aren't tragedies. There's not grief, not sorrow, there's not suffering. However, we add that psychological suffering to everything by thinking about it, by forming that opinion and making it even worse. Grief is a every layer experience, a full body vibrational experience. It doesn't need that added thought. It doesn't need the I am in grief, I'm grieving, life is so miserable without you, how am I ever going to get by? Those are all thoughts. If we say what's wrong with right now, if we didn't think about it, we are still grieving, our body is still experiencing those losses. But suffering is not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a thing. It's just what's occurring, it's what's happening. We add those thoughts to it and we make it something else. We make it a story, and the story sucks. Does it have to suck? I don't know. Try it without a story. Ask yourself the next time you're sitting somewhere. I remember doing this with my poor little dog Toby at the 24-hour emergency vet, and he was suffering, and I was very much afraid that he was nearing the end, which he was, again, sadly, and being completely miserable in that waiting room. It was hours on end. It was way past the time I normally go to sleep. And I was just miserable. And I remember thinking, Bob Admonson's, it's actually the name of one of his books, and he says it all the time in every one of his talks. What's wrong with right now if I don't think about it? And I realized that I was thinking about Toby. I was thinking about going to bed. I was thinking about wanting to be home. I was thinking about all the things that I wasn't doing right now. So I just sat with it. No less miserable, but I didn't add the psychological suffering into the mix. And in that sense, as miserable as I was no longer suffering. I was no longer in that place of suffering. I was just in that experience of what it was. So to say giving up suffering, as the Buddha made his claim, doesn't necessarily mean there is no such thing as suffering. Um, to say that suffering is illusory doesn't mean that it's not experienced. It just means that there's no solid, actual entity, thing that causes suffering. It can't be removed, can't be operated on. It can't be, again, pinpointed, much like the thinker, the command center in the brain. None of that can be pointed at and said, that's the thinker, that's suffering, that's that. Who knows how it happens? If a neurologist, making sure that I'm getting that correct, if they can't pinpoint consciousness, where a thinker comes from, if everything indeed is either arising within consciousness, or if consciousness is rising, a hard problem of consciousness, if it's arising from the brain, if they can't figure it out, then a 58-year-old yogi isn't going to figure it out either. The difference is, I don't need to figure anything out. That I experience life, and it seems to be getting deeper in expression the longer I meditate. And by that, I mean the more years that I put in, the deeper it is. And life becomes easier by degrees. But again, that doesn't mean that I'm complaint free. It doesn't mean that I am anything other than anyone else, except, as Krishnamurti said, lecturing people, and this was later in his life, he stopped one of his long talks, and there was people who had followed him for years. Krishnamurti was the Grateful Dead of gurus, people following him from place to place. And he paused in one of his talks and he said, "Do you want to know my secret?" And of course, this is what everybody was waiting for. Finally, the opportunity to learn the secret of what made Krishnamurti Krishnamurti. And he simply said, "I don't mind what happens," which is pretty profound when you think about it. He didn't say nothing happened. He didn't say that he's not miserable, that he doesn't suffer, that there isn't grief, that he doesn't stub his toe in the morning going to the bathroom in the dark because he's only carrying a little mini flashlight and he doesn't want to turn the light on. He doesn't say any of that stuff. He says, "I don't mind what happens." And he doesn't mean I as in the personality, which is always going to be filled with complaints about something, which is always going to have an opinion, which is always going to be clever. What he meant was I as in the I am presence that precedes everything, consciousness itself. That I am doesn't mind what happens. And that's the same I am that you are, that I am. Consciousness, not divided, not my consciousness, not your consciousness, consciousness, straight across the board. For me, everything arises in accomplishment and consciousness because that's all I can experience. So when scientists say that it originates from the brain, where does the brain originate from? How do we know it's a brain? We know it's a brain because we're conscious of having a brain. The brain is conscious of itself. That's all there is. So that's all we can experience. So the hard problem of consciousness isn't that hard if you don't think about it. All right, guys. This is going to be a quick talk. I think I can wrap it up. Unless someone pops on and we start talking about training. I didn't make it to my blog, but I am going to start wrapping things up. Um, and we're at 25 minutes in. We'll see if we can end it before 30 minutes. I really don't have much more to say. We covered the universe, we covered suffering, we covered um, consciousness, we covered turtles all the way down, Rumi again. So, what more? Morning walks, hormonal response for a better night's sleep. What more could anyone want in a 30-minute talk, less than 30-minute talk, about absolutely nothing at all, no subject? That's one of the hardest things, actually, is for me to title these talks when I'm done, because when I'm finished, I think, what did I actually say? And I can't think of a single thing that stands out that I've said. And yet somehow I managed to have that conversation for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. I think over an hour once. And yet, emptiness. Don't get me started on that subject. I can talk for hours and hours on nothing, about being nothing, happily so, and probably with less pause. Emptiness, nothing. Of course, I mentioned that in every talk as well. I mentioned the Heart Sutra. I mentioned the headless experience, experiments pointing, finding our own conscious awareness. That's where magic lies. Self-inquiry. Allow yourself to realize your innate emptiness and that everything appears within that, and you are living a life of bewilderment, a life of magic, because everything that's going on is prior to label, prior to story, prior to being told that that's just a bird. It's just the pure isness, as Richard Bach, author of Jonathan Livingston Seagull and Illusions, he calls it the great isness. He was actually a student of Jane Roberts, who channeled the Seth material. Connections everywhere, pretty amazingly so. He was one of the first writers who taught me to look for coincidences, synchronicities, those meaningful connections that are always present, always there, but we don't see them. And yet, as we deepen ourselves within awareness, when we come more towards our reality, our real self, we see those coincidences, we see them everywhere. As they say in Manifest, everything's connected. And I still haven't watched season 3. And Mocha says, you said what needed to be said, and I think she's right. I'm going to wrap it up now. I'm going to say goodbye to everyone, whoever popped in during the talk and stuck around, and those who might catch this conversation later. This is one of those rare talks where it doesn't last an hour plus. So let's all congratulate ourselves for wrapping things up tightly. I will see everyone tomorrow for burpees, and then again for a live session in the afternoon. I mention this quite often. If anyone wants to, Duncan and I tried this, but it didn't work out. If anyone wants to join me live for a conversation about this and everything else that we ever talk about, and probably new stuff as well, to just take that dialogue in whatever direction it goes, let me know and we'll make it work. It'll sort of be a non-podcast, if that makes sense. A non-podcast, since we're talking about nothing, a non-cast. That one I like. I got 10 seconds to wrap this up. I'm going to say goodbye. Have a good day, guys.